Tonight on Primetime Politics, the tactics of intimidation.
Instructions, I've never seen anything like it, telling us to make sure that we kept our doors locked, to protect our constituents, to have panic buttons, to have an escape route if necessary.
We'll speak with NDP MP Charlie Angus about an op-ed piece he recently wrote, denouncing the constant harassment politicians face and tying it to the Conservative leader who Mr. Angus accuses of catering to public rage for political gain. And we'll talk about the concerns being raised with our political panel. Is it fair to lay it at the feet of Pierre Poilievre, or is the violence and rage just a sign of the times? This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Charlie Angus is calling it the politics of intimidation. MPs physically threatened at public events, targeted on social media, and in more than one instance, their homes and property vandalized. But while the NDP Member of Parliament argues in an opinion piece published by the Tyee that every politician needs to work at restoring civil discussion, he blames the Conservative leader for exacerbating the problem. Mr. Angus writes, anyone who has followed the metastasizing influence of online extremism will recognize that the lines between the marginal fringe and mainstream right-wing rhetoric are becoming increasingly blurred. And this is why it is crucial for leaders of all parties to find ways to tone down the rhetoric. But that is not happening, writes Mr. Angus. Clearly, the majority of the serious threats are coming from marginal and fringe sources, but MPs are now living in a world of constant harassment from those who are parroting the bumper sticker slogans of the Poilievre Conservatives. Well, joining us now is the author of that opinion piece, Charlie Angus, NDP MP for Timmins James Bay. Charlie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Listen, you know, I saw that letter last week, and what really interested me was the timing of this. Why the letter now? What inspired you to write it? Was it a particular event?
We're seeing increasing red flags in our political discourse, our political life in Canada, that I think are very troubling. Recently, we had a mass email sent from the House of Commons Security to every MP office warning about planned demonstrations related to Pierre Poilievre's carbon tax. And the instructions, I've never seen anything like it, telling us to make sure that we kept our doors locked, to protect our constituents, to have panic buttons, to have an escape route if necessary. Warnings of a menace to parliamentarians is something that I've never seen before articulated like that, but we're seeing more and more of it. And I think what I found really concerning was that recently Mr. Poilievre was celebrated by Alex Jones, the hate conspirator, and there was no effort by Mr. Poilievre to distance himself from Alex Jones. And I mean, there would have been a time when any politician of any stripe would have said that kind of toxic hate belongs on the other side of the border, and we categorically reject it. We never heard that, and then he followed that up with his meeting with that protest camp where he was seen with the defaced Canadian flags and the Diagolon symbol. These are really concerning symbols of right-wing extremism, and Mr. Poilievre hasn't separated himself. So what I was trying to do is look at the politics of rage, look at how it's starting to upend how we engage with our constituents, and whether or not if the Conservatives are actually trying to exploit it. I called it the politics of intimidation, in order to channel this growing online rage that we're seeing in Canadian society.
Well, you do accuse Pierre Poilievre of bringing extreme right-wing thought into the mainstream of political debate. That's what you write about. But, you know, when you look at those two examples, first, the Conservative Party says that the visit that took place on the New Brunswick-Nova Scotia border was an impromptu visit. It was not planned. There was no vetting involved. And they also add that they don't listen to Alex Jones, whether or not Alex Jones thinks well of Pierre Poilievre. Is the argument you're making here a bit tenuous when the Conservatives clearly don't agree with the logic behind it?
That's a ridiculous response from them. A man who's going to be Prime Minister of Canada does an impromptu hangout in a trailer that has diagolon symbols and defaced Canadian flags. That just doesn't happen. That's as ridiculous as when Justin Trudeau used to appear running for without his shirt on, just happening to be seen at graduation ceremonies. People who are being Prime Minister, these are scripted. This is planned. This is about sending a message. I think the issue on Alex Jones is we never heard Pierre Poilievre separate himself. That's an easy thing to do. This is a man who harassed and terrorized the families of 20 children murdered at Sandy Hook. Saying, hey, that guy's reprehensible is a pretty straight up thing. But what we're seeing in the metastasizing of the online right is that there are a lot of players out there in the world of bot, rage farm, disinformation, conspiracy, that I think the Conservatives don't want to cross and be on the wrong side of, and they're certainly channeling it very much in the bumper sticker slogans that we're seeing from the Poilievre campaign, and we see that as MPs in our lives. The kind of harassment, the online messaging, the growth of sort of threat and menace that now more and more reflects a lot of the talking points from the Conservatives. So I think these are fair conversations we need to have. If we're going to maintain a democracy that's open, where people can go in public and participate and talk. And I'll just add, the other element that I felt was time to write was when an MP like Pam Damoff says she's not running again because she's afraid for her life. These are troubling signs, and it's incumbent upon all of us, regardless of our political background, to say we have to find a way to pull back from that and establish norms of what is proper and fair public engagement and disagreement.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, if an election were held right now, Mr. Poilievre's popularity, that of the Conservative Party, it would put him in majority government territory. Why aren't other Canadians bothered by what you're seeing?
The vast majority of Canadians are going about their business. The people who make threats and harassment are a very small minority. These are people, from the experience I've had with them, of a very excessive sense of entitlement. They didn't like how the last election was decided. They don't like the fact that there was a pandemic and we had to take steps. They feel that their rights should supersede others. The vast majority of Canadians are carrying on. They don't pay attention. But the issue, and I tried to raise this in the article, is that when there's a constant level of menace and threat to MPs, that MPs' offices are now being outfitted with security features, limits to access, when MPs are actually thinking twice about posting where they're going, democracy loses. Because the only way we can really maintain a good democracy across party lines is the ability of people to engage with their MPs. So for me, I don't often now say where I'm going to be or what time or why I'm doing stuff, because there's always that concern of a very small percentage of people who just may act on the threats they're making. That's a problem, and I think all of us, regardless of political stripe, should just say, hey, that kind of behavior is way over the line. That's not acceptable. I've had many great engagements over the years with people who are never going to vote for me. I've always loved knocking on their doors, talking to them. That's what democracy is, and we cannot allow the kind of Steve Bannon extremist and threat menace that is starting to appear in all the Western democracies, and it's here in Canada.
You know, we asked the Conservative Party to give a response to your letter, and part of what they had to say reads as follows. While Canadians struggle to put a roof over their head or food on the table, Charlie Angus and Jagmeet Singh hiked the carbon tax and supported $61 billion of new inflationary spending in the budget, which will cost families $3,687 in new government debt and spending. So that's how they're responding to your letter, pointing to policies rather to what you are trying to highlight here. How do you respond to that?
Well, I find it really disheartening that what we get from the Conservatives is just a relentless presentation of bumper sticker slogans, political lies, when the question is where do you stand on extremism? Where do you stand on people like Pam Damoff being threatened? Are you going to blame that on the carbon tax? That's to me is really irresponsible. I would remind viewers of the very powerful final statement Aaron O'Toole made in the House. I remember how moving it was when he was was trying to warn people, you have to stop swinging for the algorithms. You have to stop playing for the outrage button. You have to actually start presenting policies. That's how democracy works, and that's how it's not working right now under Pierre Poilievre.
So you have decided not to run again in the next election campaign. What does that mean for what you will be doing then? Because obviously you're raising an issue that's important to you in this opinion piece. So what are you going to do about it?
One of the things I decided not to run after 20 years because of the changes in the electoral boundary that makes my riding so massive. I'll never be home, and I've been a part-time dad and a part-time husband for 2 decades, so I'm going to refocus my life. I felt it was important for me to speak up because I know a number of MPs who suffered much more frightening threats and concerns than I have, who don't want to speak up, who are very worried, who don't want to draw attention to themselves. Again, I'm saying that there's a very, very tiny percentage of people who are being, who are using this sense of political intimidation, believing it's a legitimate political tool, but it needs to be called out. We need to shine a light. I'm trying to raise conversation on it. I think it's that the beauty of our Canadian democracy was that ability across party lines to sit at a table, and I've sat in beer halls with people from different political parties and talked and had great conversations. I want to keep that tradition alive.
Charlie Angus, I appreciate you joining us today to talk about the opinion piece that you wrote.
Thank you so much.
Now, we did ask Conservatives for reaction to Mr. Angus's opinion piece, and this is, in part, what we received from Pierre Poilievre's office. Charlie Angus, along with his leader Jagmeet Singh, they write, sold out Canadians to secure their own pensions and a place in Justin Trudeau's government. Common sense Conservatives are listening to the priorities of the millions of Canadians that want to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. It is the endorsement of hard-working, everyday Canadians that Conservatives are working to earn. Well, to continue the conversation, let's bring in our political panel. Susan Smith is principal with the Blue Sky Strategy Group, Josie Sabatino, senior consultant with Summa Strategies, and Anne McGrath is principal secretary to the NDP leader. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Hello.
So listen, I want to do a go around here, but Anne, I'm going to get you to start us out because it is a member of your party that's raising the concern. Just how troubling has it become for politicians?
Well, I think there's lots of evidence about how troubling it's become. And I would say, like, Charlie Angus is shining a particular spotlight on it right now, but we've had lots of other things. Like, we have had, we've seen what's happening with mayors in Quebec that are stepping down because of the abuse. We saw what happened with Catherine McKenna when she was the environment minister. We've seen it we've seen things that have happened with Jagmeet Singh during a campaign stop. We saw what happened with the Prime Minister during a campaign stop. We saw what happened with Pam Danoff the other day, saying that she's not going to run again because of this. So I think that there's lots of evidence that there is a level of intimidation and harassment that is very, very troubling, and creates an atmosphere and an environment where people don't necessarily want to step up and take on these roles. And then when they get in, and those who do, when they get in these roles, find that it can be quite difficult. They face a lot of difficulty from very, very extreme, rude, and sometimes dangerous behavior.
Susan, what are you hearing?
Yeah, the same. I'm very sorry to hear, see what Charlie Angus has written and the harassment that his daughters got, and that there were axes, thrown through windows of MPs' offices. I know of 2 ministers that, one, I saw pictures of cars parked outside of their homes with violent messaging on them. Others, when you hear about protesters showing up in front of people's homes, public service. Because someone is a public servant, it does not give people the right to harass, intimidate, and abuse. You can, as John Manley famously said, you can disagree without being disagreeable. But the freedom of social media has crossed into what people believe, and incorrectly believe, is social permission to threaten and abuse people. And think about even Minister Freeland when she was almost followed into that elevator. It's a sad day in Canada when our politicians have to think about their safety beyond what ordinary folks do. And I think it's incumbent on every single politician to try and dial back the tone, declare those those kinds of activities completely unacceptable, and not court the kind of people and ignore the kind of behavior that's out there.
Josie, what are you hearing?
I think this is a problem that spans all political parties. I've worked in an MP's office before, and the daily kind of harassment that comes through social channel DMs, you know, into a general inbox with contact information attached to it is what should really concern Canadians when they hear these stories. And what we don't want to happen as a result of MP harassment and intimidation is that they take a step back from public life. What we need is more engagement with Canadians, not less. And, you know, Anne referenced Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's stop in Belleville last year, where he was intimidated by over 100 people. And these are the consequences. It pushes people, political leaders, further from public life when we actually just need to engage more.
Okay, so obviously we're hearing it from all corridors that this is a real problem. Except, you know, Mr. Angus in his letter there, Anne, he lays it at the feet of Pierre Poilievre. And is that fair to do when, you know, people have been angry for a very long time, exacerbated by the pandemic? Is this really fair to put it at Mr. Poilievre's feet, or is this just a sign of the times? I
think what Charlie is saying, I don't want to put words in his mouth or anything like that, but I think that he is talking about the kind of taking a lot of the fear and the anxiety and the frustration that many people are experiencing right now and weaponizing it. And I think that there is no question that some of the language that the Conservative leader and some members of his caucus are using does definitely go over the line, I think, in terms of weaponizing people's feelings of frustration and discontent right now. And I think that, you know, I wouldn't say that it is equal among all parties. I would say actually there are some differences. I think that women experience it in particular ways, and I do believe that racialized members of Parliament and staff also, you know, there's a difference in the way that, in the amount and the level and the level of hatred that's associated with it and the impact.
Susan?
Yeah, I agree with Anne on that. It's not often I agree with Charlie Angus either. I think Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives at times have done exactly that, weaponized things. Things get said in the House of Commons, then they become a fundraising letter. I mean, the reality is, you're right, Michael, people have been angry for a long time, but they didn't come out and do something about it. They said something to their neighbors. They didn't get so angry that they wanted to do the equivalent of punching somebody or hurting somebody or screaming in somebody's face. You know, that's not okay. We saw it. It started in the South. It started with Donald Trump in that era. It has bled north, unfortunately. But I think leaders can say to their supporters and their followers, don't do that. That's not cool. It's not okay. And we're not hearing that from Minister Poilievre, as Mr. Angus pointed out. And then we see additional things from Mr. Poilievre, like going to that, you know, stopping in at that protest where there's diagolon signs and there's F. Trudeau signs and defacing of the Canadian flag. So you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth on this, and your actions speak as loudly as your words do. So by showing up at those things, you're tacitly endorsing that kind of behavior.
Josie, what do you think? Is it fair to put it at Mr. Poilievre's lap here?
Absolutely not. And this comes back to the fact that this is something that all MPs, regardless of party lines, are facing. Mr. Poilievre's own wife was a victim of, you know, an unsolicited attack on her that the RCMP had to look into by one of these groups that Mr. Angus is accusing Pierre Poilievre of cozying up to. I mean, the facts don't speak for themselves here. And if he's not choosing to use his platform to highlight the antics of these extremists, I think that is a choice and something that he is cognizant of doing, of not giving spotlight, not giving attention to his almost 1 million followers about. So I think we have to reflect on what is happening in the House of Commons. I mean, as you watch debate play out day after day, there's a right, there's a wrong, but there's no middle ground. And that's what's facing our party leaders. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of consensus in the debates that they're having.
Do you want to say something about that?
I think tone matters. And, you know, in the business world, they talk about tone at the top. And tone at the top is set from each of the party leaders. So I don't see Jagmeet Singh slinging those kinds of things. Mr. Trudeau sometimes loses his temper here and there, but largely he stays above the fray on that. I think Mr. Poilievre has stepped over the line himself, and he certainly doesn't say much when his caucus steps over the line in those kinds of things. And like I said, when you show up at a protest and you walk and talk with the truckers who have signage and language and nasty things all over the place, you are tacitly endorsing that kind of behavior.
And what do you say to that?
Well, I think that when Pierre Poilievre's wife was, being attacked, and he took to social media to say something about it, I thought that was significant. And it's why I found it so puzzling that he would then go and sort of deliberately engage with, again, it was Diagolon with his wife, and he would go and deliberately engage with them and appear with them at the event in New Brunswick. So I think that is a little bit of talking out of both sides of your mouth, for sure.
You know, Paul Wellesley, he recently wrote a book on Justin Trudeau, and he talked about how, you know, a lot of this partisanship seems to be tied to the intensification of partisanship seems to be very much tied to fundraising, because you can raise more money out of outrage, and you know, nowadays without public funding, without corporations, political parties need this. What do you make of that argument, Josie?
Well, something Aaron O'Toole, the former leader of the Conservative Party, said in the House of Commons during his last speech is that members are engaging in these clickbait antics. They're using their time in the House to generate these clips that can be used to fundraise off. And that is true. That is what is happening from every political party, because we talked about this a few weeks ago. Social media has created an environment where we have limited attention spans and sometimes 30 seconds to get your message out there. We're not engaging in substantive policy. We're engaging in trying to get something out as quickly as possible while pinning it on your opponent. So I think that's entirely right, and that is what we are seeing happening today.
Yeah. Susan, what do you make of that? How much of this is about fundraising?
A lot of it is about fundraising. When you see the clip posted in social media, when you see the language, I got a Conservative fundraising thing today. Justin Trudeau's going to ruin your summer. You know, you said it yourself. Trying to get people mad is a lot more motivating than trying to make people happy, or, you know, unicorns and sunshine and unicorn and rainbow doesn't work generally from a fundraising perspective. You have to press a button for people. I think parties engage in it to a certain extent. It's the level to which it is activated. So the headlines I get on fundraising solicitations from one party versus the headlines I get on the fundraising solicitations from other parties are very different. And I think there are others like to gin up there's one party in particular, the official opposition, I believe, that really tries to gin up the anger level to drive donations. Okay,
quickly running out of time, but I will ask then, because if this is tied to fundraising, does this type of language then inspire more of it, or does it inspire people to take a higher road, if you will, do you think?
I believe that the lack of public financing for political parties is I think it's a real problem, and I think that as it has declined to the point that I think the last time there was any public financing at all left was 2015, you have seen that the fundraising pitches have to be much more emotional, and they have to drive people to want to donate, and it's easier to do that with anger than it is to do it with hope. It just is. But it's not the only thing. There are other things in our electoral system that I think are problematic. I think first past the post is a problem. I think that we need a few fundamental changes. One is proportional representation, and another is public financing of political parties and strict limits on corporate and union donations.
Quickly, in terms of what you think needs to then be done or respond?
There are limits on corporate donations and union donations. We're limited in terms of what personal donations people can make. I think we're at a new time in politics. We're still figuring out what happens on the social media world. Sadly, we're still in the aura of Donald Trump and the cross-pollination of Fox News and that kind of behavior that goes on. Canadians emulate what they see wherever they happen to see it, and there's a big pipe of that kind of bad behavior going on. I'd like to think the next election would be better and the tone would be better. I'm not confident it's going to be, sadly, and I think that just puts more people off politics and puts more good people off stepping into politics because of that.
Last word to you, Josie.
I think some of the rhetoric we're already seeing out of the Liberal Party, and I'm thinking about them trying to tie the notwithstanding clause into abortion and pinning this on Conservatives, is an example of misinformation. It's something that Pierre Poilievre himself has said that he will not legislate. It is something that his staff have come out and said that is not the case. So we're already seeing this creep into the rhetoric. Would like to piggyback off Susan and hope that, things will be on the right foot for the next election, but by the tone that we're already hearing, that is not the case.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. Of course, we'll talk about it again without a doubt, but for now, Anne, Susan, and Josie, thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Well,
time now for a look at what else happened in politics today. Immigration Minister Mark Miller tabled a bill that would, if passed, change the laws around who can become a Canadian citizen. In 2009, the Harper government took citizenship away from children born abroad to parents who were naturalized Canadians. Bill C-71 would change that, allowing citizens who were born outside of Canada to extend citizenship to their children who are also born out of country.
The proposed legislation will extend citizenship by descent beyond the first generation in a way that is inclusive and upholds the value of our citizenship. If passed, the bill extends automatic citizenship to anyone who was born outside the country to a Canadian parent before the legislation comes into force. We also introduced amendments to respond to issues raised at parliamentary committees as well as in the courts. They will restore citizenship to those we call lost Canadians. That could be someone who was never able to become a citizen or lost citizenship because of previous and outdated legislative provisions.
The proposed law is the government's response to a 2023 Ontario Superior Court ruling that said the changes made by the Harper government were unconstitutional. A group of 23 U.S. senators have written a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau urging him to live up to Canada's NATO commitment and invest 2% of GDP on defense. In their letter, the senators state that they are concerned and profoundly disappointed that Canada's most recent projection indicated that it will not reach its 2% commitment this decade. Here is what we heard from the Defense Minister, Bill Blair, in response to the U.S. senators.
Canada is on a very strong upward trajectory in defense spending. We know we've got work to do. We've acknowledged that from day one, that there is more that we need to do. We've clearly indicated in our budget the path to getting that done. And I would be able to, I'm sure I'd be able to assure those concerned senators that Canada will be a ready and capable ally to NATO, in North America and NORAD, and around the world.
The Trudeau government recently released a new defense plan, but despite the billions committed, the spending will only account for 1.76% of GDP by fiscal 2029-30. Métis National Council President Cassidy Caron announced today that she will not be seeking re-election to the post.
I am really proud of the Métis National Council that we have built, and I am confident in leaving behind a strong, functioning, and ethical organization with exceptional and dedicated staff for the next generation of leaders to come.
Caron said she wanted to spend more time with family and revealed that she is pregnant with her first child. An election to replace her is slated to take place in September. And it's official, Toronto's getting a WNBA expansion franchise. It would begin playing in the 2026 season. With the announcement this morning, Toronto will become the league's 14th team and the first located outside of the United States. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was on hand for the announcement and spoke about the recent success of women's sports in Canada.
Proud to be part of a country that uplifts women in sport, whether it's Canadian soccer legend and my cousin Christine Sinclair, or all the great players of the PWHL, or all the incredible basketball players we're celebrating today. Cities across Canada have said loudly and clearly, we are and we want to be a destination for women in sports.
And that is our program for this Thursday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, have a great night.